The cold wind howled through the grand mansion as David Hartley stood by the window, his face twisted with frustration. Outside, the night was dark, but the lights of the city shimmered in the distance, like an endless sea of possibility. Inside, however, there was nothing but tension. His wife, Sarah, sat in the living room, her eyes red from crying, holding their son, Leo, close to her chest. The three of them had been through so much, yet David was about to make a decision that would break them all. "You don't understand, Sarah." David's voice was harsh, as though the words themselves were too painful to say. He turned around, eyes blazing, his posture rigid with anger. "I have bigger dreams, bigger responsibilities now. You and Leo, you're just holding me back." Sarah's heart sank, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. She had always known that David's ambition would take him places, but she never thought it would push him so far away from her and their son. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched Leo tighter. The small boy, barely 5 years old, looked up at his father with confused, innocent eyes. "David, please. We're your family. We need you," Sarah pleaded, her voice trembling. "Leo needs his father." But David's gaze remained cold, distant. "You think I'm going to throw everything away for a simple family life? I'm going to be a billionaire, Sarah. I don't have time for you two anymore." The words cut through the room like a knife. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat, and for a moment, all she could do was stare at David in disbelief. This was not the man she had married, the man who had once promised to stand by her through everything. This man was different. This man was consumed by his own ambition, his own dreams, and there was no room left for the family he had built. "I'm done," David said, his voice icy and final. "You and Leo, find your own way." With that, he turned on his heel and walked out of the room, leaving Sarah and Leo in the silence of the cold mansion. The door slammed shut behind him, and the sound echoed in Sarah's chest, a painful reminder of the man she had loved, and lost. As the hours passed, Sarah sat there in the dark, cradling Leo in her arms, rocking back and forth as though trying to comfort herself as much as she comforted him. She couldn't believe what had just happened. The man she had married, the father of her child, had rejected them both without a second thought. He had chosen his own dreams over them, and now they were left alone, unsure of what to do next. But in the silence of the night, something began to stir in Sarah's heart. She couldn't let David's rejection define her. She couldn't let it destroy her son's future. She would find a way to survive, to build a life for herself and Leo, without him. The next morning, Sarah stood at the door, holding Leo's tiny hand in hers, ready to leave the mansion. But as she opened the door, she found a black car parked in the driveway, with a man in a suit standing next to it. The man was holding an envelope, and his eyes met Sarah's with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Mrs. Hartley," the man asked, his voice businesslike. "I have something for you from Mr. Hartley." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. What could David possibly want now? "Is he coming back?" she asked, though her voice trembled with uncertainty. The man's eyes flickered. "He's not coming back, ma'am. But he has left you something very valuable." Sarah's heart raced as the man handed her the envelope. The weight of it seemed to promise something monumental, something that would change everything. But what could it be? And was this the start of something worse or something better? The answers were hidden in that envelope, and Sarah had no choice but to open it. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, her hand still holding the envelope. The man in the suit stood there, waiting, as if expecting her to take it. Leo tugged at her sleeve, sensing the tension in the air. "Mom, who's that?" Leo whispered, his little voice barely audible. Sarah forced a smile and bent down to ruffle his hair. "I don't know, sweetheart. But we'll find out soon enough." Her hands shook as she took the envelope from the man. It was thick, sealed with David's signature on the front, but the weight of it felt wrong. Why had David left her something? After all he'd just said, after the cruel rejection, why would he leave her anything at all? The man in the suit cleared his throat, his face expressionless. Mr. Hartley wanted you to have this, Mrs. Hartley. He said it was important for your future. Sarah nodded silently, her eyes flicking between the man and the envelope. Is there anything else? She asked, her voice strained. The man shook his head. No, ma'am. I'm just delivering the message. He turned and walked back to the black car without another word. Sarah glanced down at Leo, who was still holding her hand, his eyes wide with confusion. She had no answers for him. She couldn't even explain what was happening herself. Let's go inside, she said softly, leading him back into the house. The quiet was unbearable as she walked down the empty hallways of the mansion. Once full of laughter and warmth, it now felt cold and hollow. She needed to know what was in the envelope, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to face whatever it was. Finally, Sarah sat down at the dining table, Leo on her lap, and slowly tore open the seal. Inside, she found a letter, neatly typed and signed by David. Her heart raced as she unfolded it and began to read. Sarah. I know this letter will be a shock to you. I didn't want it to end this way, but I've come to realize that my life is taking me in a direction that doesn't include you and Leo. However, I am not leaving you empty-handed. Enclosed is a legal document that transfers ownership of the Hartley estate to you and Leo. It's yours now, free and clear, no strings attached. Along with it, you'll find a sum of money, enough to ensure you and Leo can live comfortably for the rest of your lives. I hope this will provide some stability and allow you to move forward without me. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused. I wish you both the best. David. Sarah's hands trembled as she finished reading. The shock hit her like a wave. The mansion. The money. Everything she and Leo could ever need was now in their hands, no strings attached. But was it really a gift, or was it just another way for David to escape responsibility, another way for him to distance himself further from them? Leo squirmed in her lap. Mom, what's in the letter? What's it say? She held him close, trying to steady herself. It says, we're going to be okay, Leo. We're going to be okay. But as Sarah tried to make sense of it all, another thought began to gnaw at her. If David had left her everything, what was his true motive? Was he trying to buy their silence? Or was there something else behind this unexpected gesture? Suddenly, a loud knock echoed through the door, pulling Sarah out of her thoughts. It was strange, considering the house was so isolated, and it was even stranger that someone would knock at this hour. Her heart thudded in her chest. Who could it be now? Sarah opened the door cautiously, and there, standing in the doorway, was another man, this one wearing a much more serious expression. He looked like someone from David's world, someone who didn't belong here, in the quiet of their broken home. I'm sorry to bother you, Mrs. Hartley, the man said, his voice low and tense. But I need to speak with you. It's about your husband. There's something you need to know. Sarah felt her stomach twist. Was this more bad news? Or was it something worse? She had no idea, but the sinking feeling in her gut told her that the story was far from over. Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, her heart pounding in her chest. The man before her wasn't just anyone, he had the look of someone who belonged to a world she had no part in, a world she had never fully understood. He was tall, well-dressed, and exuded a sense of urgency that sent a chill down her spine. Leo, sensing her unease, clung to her side, looking up at the man with wide, curious eyes. I'm sorry to intrude, Mrs. Hartley, the man said, his voice even but filled with something unspoken. But I need to speak with you. It's about your husband. There's something important you need to know. The words echoed in Sarah's mind, but she couldn't process them. Her stomach twisted tighter, and she felt the air grow colder around her. What more could David have done? What more could there possibly be? She had just received a letter from him, a letter that had promised to give her and Leo everything they could ever need. But now, this man had arrived with a sense of urgency, and it didn't feel like good news. "Who are you?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. "What do you mean? It's about my husband. What's going on?" The man's expression softened slightly, though his tone remained firm. "My name is Mark Clayton. I work for one of Mr. Hartley's business associates. I need you to understand that what I'm about to say is very serious." Sarah felt a sudden wave of nausea. Her instincts told her that something had gone terribly wrong. David's rejection had already shattered everything she knew, but now, this. What could it be? "I'm listening," she said, trying to steady herself. Leo squeezed her hand tighter, sensing the shift in her emotions. Mark glanced around the empty hallway, then leaned in slightly, as though to ensure no one else could overhear. His next words hit Sarah like a blow to the chest. "Your husband didn't just leave you the estate and the money," Mark began. "He's been involved in something much more dangerous. Something illegal." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. What are you talking about?" she stammered, struggling to grasp the gravity of what he was saying. Mark hesitated for a moment, then spoke again, his voice low but urgent. "David Hartley is involved in a high-stakes business deal, something that's connected to organized crime. The estate, the money, it's all part of an agreement. And the truth is, you and Leo aren't just receiving a gift. You're now tied to something much bigger, something that could put you both in danger." The room spun around Sarah. She reached out for the doorframe to steady herself, her mind racing. Could it be true? David, the man who had always seemed so focused on his dreams of success, had been hiding something like this? Could it be possible that everything she thought she knew about him had been a lie? Mark continued, his face grim. "There are people who won't take kindly to Mr. Hartley's decisions. And if they find out that you've been left with this estate, there's a chance they'll come after you. This is far from over." Sarah's world seemed to collapse in that moment. She had thought that the mansion and the money were her escape, a way to rebuild her life with Leo, but now it seemed like they were walking straight into a nightmare. Leo tugged on her sleeve, his small voice cutting through the haze of shock. "Mom, what's wrong? What's going to happen to us?" Sarah's heart shattered at the sight of her son, his innocent eyes filled with confusion. How could she explain this to him? How could she protect him from this new danger that had come into their lives? She looked back at Mark, who was watching her with a mix of pity and urgency. "What should I do?" she whispered, barely able to keep her voice steady. Mark paused for a moment, his face hardening. "You need to leave. Get out of here. The sooner, the better." Before Sarah could ask any more questions, Mark turned and started to walk away, his footsteps echoing in the quiet of the hallway. But just as he reached the end of the driveway, he stopped and glanced back at her. "One more thing, Mrs. Hartley," he said. "If you want to survive this, you'll have to trust no one. Not even me. Because this isn't just about David anymore. It's about protecting you and your son." Sarah's mind reeled. What had David gotten them into? And how could she possibly protect Leo from something so dangerous, something so far out of her control? She had already lost David, but now she was facing a threat that was much bigger than anything she could have imagined. As Sarah stood there, feeling more alone than ever, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She fumbled for it, her hands shaking, and saw a message pop up on the screen. It was from an unknown number. "I know what's going on. Meet me tonight. 8 p.m. You need to hear the truth." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Who was this? And what truth did they know? The message was a new puzzle, and Sarah felt the weight of the choices she now had to make. Could she trust whoever was on the other end of that message? Or was this just another piece of the web of deceit and danger that was rapidly closing in on her? The hours dragged by, each minute heavier than the last. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking a tightrope, with no safety net below. Her thoughts circled around the message she had received, the cryptic words playing over and over in her mind. I know what's going on. Meet me tonight. 8 p.m. You need to hear the truth. She couldn't fathom who this person could be. Could it be someone David had trusted? Or was it a trap set by those dangerous people Mark had warned her about? Her heart raced with the possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Leo was tucked into bed, his small face peaceful in sleep, but Sarah couldn't find peace. She paced around the mansion, feeling the weight of the vast, empty rooms pressing down on her. The house had once been filled with laughter, warmth, and love, but now, it was a cold monument to the man who had betrayed her. She kept glancing at the clock on the wall. It was almost time. The suspense was unbearable, but she couldn't afford to ignore the message. The man who had sent it clearly knew something about David's dealings, something important. But could she trust him? At precisely 8 p.m., Sarah stepped out of the mansion. The air was cool, and the night was silent, broken only by the distant hum of city lights. She hesitated before getting into her car, every nerve in her body on edge. She was alone. There was no one to help her, no one to turn to. This was her fight now, and Leo's too. As she drove through the dark streets, her thoughts whirled. What if it was a trap? What if this was some twisted game, designed to draw her deeper into the mess David had left behind? Yet, what choice did she have? If there was any chance of uncovering the truth, she had to take it. She had to protect her son. When she reached the address in the message, a rundown building on the outskirts of town, her heart leapt into her throat. The place looked deserted, the windows dark and empty. Sarah parked the car, staring at the building with a mix of dread and determination. She stepped out of the car, her heels clicking on the cracked pavement. The night seemed to close in around her, the silence unnerving. She looked around, but there was no one in sight. 8:05 p.m. Sarah checked her watch again. The stranger had promised to meet her at 8 o'clock. She tried to calm her racing heart, telling herself to be patient. He could be inside, waiting for her. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the man approached. It wasn't the same man from earlier, the one who had come to her door. This man was older, with graying hair and a hard expression. He wore a suit that looked expensive, but there was something about him that felt out of place in the dim alley. "You're Mrs. Hartley?" the man asked, his voice low and gravelly. Sarah nodded cautiously, her eyes searching his face. "Who are you? What do you know about my husband?" The man looked around before speaking again. "I'm someone who used to work with David. My name's James. We need to talk, but not here. Follow me." Sarah hesitated, but with no other options, she followed him as he led her to the back of the building. There, he opened a door and ushered her inside. The room was small and dimly lit, a single bulb hanging overhead. James closed the door behind them and turned to face Sarah. His eyes were serious, his demeanor urgent. "David got in too deep," James said, his voice tight. "You have to understand, Mrs. Hartley. This isn't just about business. It's about survival." Sarah swallowed hard. "Survival? What are you talking about?" James ran a hand through his graying hair, clearly frustrated. "David didn't just get involved with the wrong people, he made enemies. Powerful enemies. And when he tried to back out, that's when they turned on him. They're going to come after you and Leo. They won't stop until they get what they want." The weight of his words hit Sarah like a ton of bricks. David hadn't just been ambitious. He had made dangerous choices, choices that had put his family in harm's way. And now she was the one left to pick up the pieces. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Why now?" James glanced around, as if making sure no one was listening. "Because I don't think you know the full extent of what David's involved in. This isn't just a business deal gone wrong. He's been working with people who have connections to organized crime, people who won't hesitate to destroy anyone who stands in their way. And right now, they're looking for the next step in David's plans. If they think you're in the way, you and Leo are at risk. Sarah's breath caught. What do you mean, the next step? What was David planning? James's gaze hardened. David was trying to get out, but he left a trail behind him. A trail that leads straight to you. You don't know this, but he was trying to buy his way out with the estate, the money, but it's not enough. He didn't complete the deal. And now the people he's been dealing with are coming for what's theirs. They think you have it. Just as Sarah opened her mouth to ask what she could do, the sound of footsteps echoed outside the room. A door slammed, followed by voices. She turned to James, her heart pounding. "Who's that?" she whispered. James's eyes went wide, and he grabbed her arm, pulling her towards a back exit. "They're here. You need to leave. Now." Before Sarah could protest, the door burst open. Shadows filled the doorway, and a voice called out from the darkness. "Mrs. Hartley, I believe we need to talk." The darkness of the room seemed to close in around Sarah as she was yanked toward the back exit by James. Her heart raced, and her mind screamed for her to think clearly. Who were these people? What did they want? Was this it, the moment everything would come crashing down? James shoved open the door to a narrow hallway, urging her to move quickly, but Sarah was frozen for a moment, trying to gather her thoughts. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and she knew they had no time to waste. "James, what's going on? Who's coming?" Sarah hissed, her breath quickening. James glanced over his shoulder, eyes wide with panic. "It's them, Mrs. Hartley. The ones David was mixed up with. They know you're here, and they'll stop at nothing to get what they want." Sarah felt the cold rush of fear as the footsteps got closer. Who were these people, and what had David done? What had he left her tangled in? The whole world felt like it was spiraling out of control. With no other option, she followed James down the hall, into a back alley that led to the street. As they stepped into the night air, Sarah heard the unmistakable sound of a car engine starting. The headlights of a black sedan sliced through the dark alley, signaling that their pursuers were already here. James stopped suddenly, gripping Sarah's arm. "Get in the car. I'll explain everything later. But right now, we need to move fast." Sarah hesitated. Every instinct told her to run in the opposite direction. But she had no choice. These men were here, and they weren't going to let her go. Not unless she got out of there, now. James shoved her toward the car, and she climbed into the back seat. As they sped away, Sarah could feel the tension in the air, thick, suffocating. The car turned sharply, weaving through the streets, until finally, it pulled into a secluded part of town, away from prying eyes. James didn't speak, only keeping his eyes on the road ahead, his hands tight on the wheel. The silence was unbearable. Sarah's thoughts were racing. What had David gotten himself into? Why was she being dragged into it? And why had she been left with nothing but a mansion, money, and a target on her back? Finally, they arrived at a small, nondescript building, barely more than a warehouse. James stopped the car, and they got out quickly, moving inside. The building was dark, and the air smelled of dust and something else, something off. "I'll explain everything now," James said, his voice low but urgent. "We don't have much time." Sarah's heart was in her throat, but she nodded. She needed answers, even if they were ones she wasn't ready to hear. "David got involved with people far more dangerous than you can imagine," James continued, his eyes shifting nervously as though he was afraid of being overheard. "The money, the estate, it wasn't just a way to buy your freedom. It was part of a much bigger scheme." Sarah's chest tightened. "What scheme? What are you talking about?" James ran a hand over his face, looking almost exhausted. "David wasn't just planning to leave everything behind for you and Leo. He was trying to use the estate as leverage to complete a deal. A deal that would have allowed him to escape these people. But he didn't finish it. He didn't get far enough. And now they're coming after you. They think you have something that belongs to them. Sarah's mind was racing. What could David have been involved in? She had always known he was focused on his business ventures, but she never imagined they would lead him to something like this. What do they want? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. James looked around before stepping closer to her, his voice barely audible. David's been involved in illegal arms deals that span countries. He got mixed up with the wrong people. People who are willing to kill for what they want. And now they think you have what they need. They think the estate's the key to finishing what David started. If you don't give them what they want. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. She could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her. She was no longer just a grieving wife, abandoned and left behind. She was now a pawn in a game far bigger than she ever imagined. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the front of the building. The door swung open, and Sarah felt the air grow thick with tension. Someone was here, someone who was after them. Before she could react, James pulled her into a side room, closing the door behind them. His voice was urgent as he whispered, "Stay here. Don't move." He moved toward the small window in the back of the room and peered out, his face tense. Sarah's heart was pounding in her chest. She didn't know what to do, where to go, or how to protect Leo. This had gone far beyond what she could handle on her own. "James," she whispered, fear rising in her throat. "What do I do now?" He turned, his face grim. "You need to leave. Get out of here. Now. I'll hold them off as long as I can. But you have to go." Sarah's mind was spinning. What could she do alone? How could she survive this? The sound of footsteps approached, heavy and determined. James's face hardened. "Go, now," he ordered, his voice harsh with urgency. But just as Sarah turned to run, a voice echoed from the front of the building, sending a shiver through her. "James, we know you're here. And we know you've got her." The air felt thick with impending danger, and Sarah's pulse quickened as she hesitated by the door. James was already moving to the window, his eyes darting around as if searching for any escape route. The voices outside grew louder, more threatening. "James, we know you're here. And we know you've got her." The cold dread crept up Sarah's spine, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. She wanted to run. She wanted to grab Leo and disappear into the night, away from all of this. But the reality was sinking in, there was no easy way out now. The people who had been after David were here, and they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. "James," she whispered, panic rising in her chest. "What are we going to do?" James didn't look back at her. His focus was entirely on the window, his brow furrowed with concentration. The voices outside were getting closer. Whoever they weren't here for pleasantries. "Stay quiet," James hissed, his tone sharp. "We need to get you out of here, but we can't do it if they know where you are." Sarah's mind raced. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, there was no way out, no safety net to catch her. She was at the mercy of people who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. Then, as if the universe had decided to throw them one last curveball, the door to the room creaked open. Sarah froze, her heart stopping in her chest. A shadow filled the doorway, and a tall figure stepped inside. "You can't hide forever, James," the figure said, his voice gravelly, filled with menace. "You know that. The game's up. Time to hand over the woman." Sarah's stomach flipped. She didn't recognize the voice, but it was cold and threatening. These were not the kinds of people who made empty threats. James turned slowly, his face hardening as he reached into his jacket pocket. "Get out, Martin. I don't have time for this." The man, Martin, stepped further into the room, his hand resting on the gun holstered at his side. His eyes narrowed as he looked Sarah up and down, his lip curling in disdain. "You think you can protect her?" Martin sneered. "You're in over your head, James. Both of you." The tension in the room was suffocating. Sarah's breath was shallow, her thoughts spinning. She needed to get out, she needed to find a way to escape. But everything in this moment seemed designed to trap her. She was caught between two dangerous forces, with no way of knowing who would win this deadly game. "I'm not going to let you hurt her," James said, his voice steady, though Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. He wasn't as calm as he was trying to appear. Martin's eyes glinted with malice. "You're already too late." Before Sarah could even react, the room was plunged into chaos. Martin lunged forward, and James grabbed him by the arm, twisting him away. The sound of struggle filled the room, followed by the sound of something heavy crashing to the floor. Sarah stumbled back, her heart racing as she looked for any opportunity to run. The door slammed open again, and another figure appeared, this one even taller than Martin. Sarah felt a rush of panic wash over her. More of them. How many people had David gotten them mixed up with? "We've got a problem, Martin," the newcomer said, his voice low and controlled. "She's not supposed to be here. We need to deal with her, and quickly." Sarah's mind was spinning. There was no way she could stay here. She had to leave. But how? How could she possibly escape without getting caught? As James struggled with Martin, Sarah's eyes darted around the room, looking for anything she could use. And then, she saw it, a fire escape ladder just outside the window. Her heart raced. That was her chance. It wasn't a guaranteed escape, but it was the only option she had left. In a split second, Sarah bolted for the window, her legs moving on instinct. She didn't think about the consequences, she didn't think about what might happen next. She just ran. James's voice echoed behind her, but she didn't stop. "Sarah, no." But it was too late. She had already flung the window open and scrambled out onto the fire escape. The cold night air hit her like a slap in the face, but she didn't care. She had to go. She had to get away from the men who were closing in on her. Her feet pounded against the metal steps as she descended, the sound of her own breathing loud in her ears. She looked down briefly, seeing the dark alleyway below. There was no turning back now. Suddenly, there was a shout from above. "Stop! Don't let her get away." But it was too late. She reached the bottom of the ladder just as a figure appeared at the window above. Without wasting another moment, Sarah turned and ran into the alley, the sound of footsteps following closely behind. She pushed herself harder, her legs burning as she sprinted through the dark streets. She couldn't look back. She had to focus on surviving. Every step was one closer to safety, but every moment felt like it could be her last. As she turned the corner, she nearly collided with a car parked on the side of the street. Without thinking, she yanked open the door and slipped inside, her heart hammering in her chest. She didn't know who was driving or if they were even willing to help her, but she had no choice. She had to take the chance. "Go," she screamed, her voice raw with fear. "Please, just go." The driver didn't hesitate, slamming his foot on the gas. The car lurched forward, and they sped away from the danger, leaving the chaos of the warehouse behind. As Sarah leaned back in the seat, gasping for air, she realized one terrifying truth: the danger wasn't over. The people after her were relentless, and this was only the beginning. But for the first time in what felt like forever, she was free, if only for a moment. The car sped down the dark street, and Sarah, still trembling, glanced out the rearview mirror. The shadowy figure of a black sedan appeared, tailing them at a distance. They were still following her. "Where are we going?" Sarah gasped. The driver glanced back at her, his eyes meeting hers through the rearview mirror. "We're not safe yet." And then, in a voice that sent a chill down her spine, he added, because they're not done with you, Mrs. Hartley. They won't stop until they get what they want.